There are moments in a young man's life when the world feels too big, too heavy, too uncertain to face head. Moments when a single choice, made quietly, without applause or witnesses, carves a path he won't fully understand until years later. Ronald Reagan had one such moment, long before Hollywood knew his smile, long before America knew his voice, long before history pressed his name into the pages of our past. And it didn't happen in a classroom or on a battlefield. It happened on a cold night in a small-town train station, under flickering lamps and drifting fog, when he was just a young man trying to find his place in a world that didn't seem to have room for him yet. He had been working odd jobs at weak stocking shelves, sweeping the back room of the general store, running errands for the radio station, where he hoped to someday be more than just a kid who carries things. Money was tight, dreams were large, and the world seemed like it moved a little faster than he could catch. On that particular evening, he had stayed late to help close the store, then walked home through the near-empty streets, hands tucked deep in his pockets, breath turning to small clouds in the cold. The train station sat at the edge of town, the kind of place where people came and went quietly, where announcements echoed through a hollow space that always smelled faintly of coal and worn leather. Reagan didn't mean to stop there. He was simply taking a shortcut, the way he'd done 100 times before. But tonight, something was different. He heard it before he saw it, a soft cry, thin, frightened, not quite human in its desperation. He paused, his footsteps slowing on the gravel path. The wind carried the sound again, clearer this time. A child, alone, afraid. Reagan's brow tightened, and he turned toward the platform, scanning the shadows beneath the dim lamps. There, near the far end of the station, a small boy sat curled up beside a bench, his face buried in his knees, shoulders shaking. The station was empty, no adults nearby, no trains coming for another hour. Reagan hesitated, not because he didn't want to help, but because he wasn't sure if he should interfere. He was young, unimportant, just a passerby. Someone else would come along, someone older, someone wiser, someone better suited. But the boy cried again, and that sound cut through every excuse. Reagan exhaled and walked toward him, hands still deep in his pockets, as though afraid the movement might scare the child further. When he reached the bench, he knelt down beside it, lowering himself to the boy's level. "Hey," he said gently. "You all right, son?" The boy didn't answer. He only trembled harder. Reagan glanced around again to make sure the child wasn't waiting for a parent who might return at any moment. But the platform was silent. Only the wind and the distant hum of the telegraph wires broke the stillness. Reagan sat on the ground, beside him, not too close, not too far, just close enough for the boy to know he wasn't alone. "What's your name?" he asked softly. Still nothing. The boy kept his face hidden, clutching something in his small hands, something Reagan couldn't quite see. A paper, a note, a ticket. He tried again, this time with a gentler voice. "I'm Ronnie. I'm not here to bother you. I just wanted to make sure you're safe." At the sound of his calm tone, the boy lifted his head slightly, just enough for Reagan to see the tear-stained cheeks, the reddened eyes, the fear that looked too big for such a small frame. My dad was supposed to get me," the boy whispered. Reagan's chest tightened, "and he didn't show up." The boy shook his head. "He said he'd meet me after work. But he didn't come. And then the man at the counter went home, and the train stopped, and I don't know what to do." Reagan felt a knot form in his throat. He knew that feeling, the feeling of being forgotten, of waiting for someone who's supposed to come through and never does. He had felt it in his own childhood more times than he cared to remember. He leaned back against the bench and stretched out his legs, pretending he was just resting and not trying to hold the weight of the boy's fear. "Well," he said casually, "looks like we're both waiting then. I don't mind keeping you company for a while." The boy sniffed, wiping his face with his sleeve. You don't?" "Nope," Reagan answered. "This old bench here is as good a place as any. Besides, it's too cold to sit out here alone." The boy hesitated, then edged closer just an inch. It was enough. Reagan didn't push further. He simply sat with him, quietly, comfortably, the way someone had once sat beside him when he needed it most. After a few minutes, the boy spoke again. "My dad's not bad. he said, almost defensively. He just forgets things when he works late. Reagan nodded slowly. People get busy. Doesn't mean they don't care. The boy looked up at him, searching his expression for judgment, for criticism, for something sharp. But Reagan offered none. They fell into a long silence, broken only by the distant sound of a freight train rumbling far down the tracks. The fog thickened around them, swirling softly beneath the lamps like ghostly ribbons. After a while, the boy unfolded the small piece of paper he'd been gripping. It was a note, scribbled quickly, handwriting messy. "Stay at the station. I'll be there, Dad." The corners were wrinkled from being held so tight. Reagan read it and felt something familiar, ache he had known as a boy, the ache of hope pressed too hard against doubt. He rested a hand on the edge of the bench and said quietly, "That note means he planned to come. That counts for something." The boy nodded, though his eyes still trembled with uncertainty. "How long have you been waiting?" Reagan asked. "A long time," the boy whispered. "Hours." Reagan lifted his head toward the station clock. It was later than he thought, much later. He felt a rising responsibility, unexpected, uninvited, but undeniable. He couldn't leave him. Some part of him, the parts shaped by the quiet men and women who had helped him in moments exactly like this, refused to stand. He adjusted his coat and said, "You know, there's a little diner across the street. They've got warm soup and the kind of pie that makes you forget what you were sad about in the first place." The boy blinked up at him. "But my dad won't find me if I leave." Reagan nodded with understanding. "You're right. Best we stay put then. But I can bring something back. Would you like that?" The boy hesitated only a second before giving a timid nod. Reagan stood, dusted off his pants, and said, "I'll be right back. I promise." He jogged across the street, bought 2 slices of pie with the last coins he had, and hurried back before the boy had time to worry. When he sat down again and handed him the warm plate, the boy's eyes widened in gratitude. They ate quietly, side by side. No speeches, no lessons, just presence. And somewhere in that stillness, Reagan felt a shift inside himself, a soft, almost imperceptible change. He wanted to protect this boy. He wanted to stand in the gap where someone else had failed. He wanted to carry weight that didn't belong to him simply because someone needed him to. That was the first spark. But the moment itself, the moment that would stay with him for the rest of his life, came next. A man stumbled onto the platform, coat crooked, tie loosened, panic etched on his face. "Tommy," he called out. The boy jumped to his feet. "Dad." The father rushed forward, wrapping him in a tight embrace, apologizing breathlessly for being late, for losing track of time, for failing him. Reagan stood to the side, watching the reunion unfold. The father looked up, noticing him for the first time. "You stayed with him?" he asked. Reagan nodded. "Just wanted to make sure he wasn't alone." The father swallowed hard, eyes shining. "Thank you. I mean that. Truly." Reagan smiled, but said nothing. He simply lifted 2 fingers to the brim of his hat, a modest gesture, and stepped away. He walked off the platform, hands back in his pockets, breath rising in cold wisps. And that was when it hit him. The feeling, the realization, not pride, not superiority, not ambition, but responsibility. A deep, quiet sense that he wanted to be someone who stepped in when others couldn't. Someone who lifted burdens, not with noise or force, but with presence. Someone who stayed in small moments, in big moments, in the moments no one else thought mattered. Halfway down the gravel road, he stopped and looked back at the dimly lit platform one last time. He didn't have the words for it then, but years later, he would dot it with the night he understood that leadership wasn't about power. It was about care. It was about care, about stepping forward when it would be easier to walk away, about being steady for someone who's trembling, about seeing fear and offering calm. It was the night he realized he wanted to lead, not with speeches, not with authority, but with heart. And that quiet moment under drifting fog and flickering lamps became the foundation of everything he would someday become. The rest of the story, what happened when he returned home, what he told his mother, and the conversation that sealed that first spark into a lifelong conviction. When Reagan walked away from the train station that night, hands deep in his pockets. The quiet of the small-town streets wrapped around him like a blanket. The lamps glowed softly above him, and the sound of gravel under his shoes seemed to echo with new meaning. He had done something simple, something small, just sitting with a child until his father came. A warm pie, a few soft words, a shared silence. Yet as he walked, he felt changed in a way he couldn't fully understand. It wasn't pride, it wasn't accomplishment, it was something steadier, more grounding, like he had stepped into a version of himself he didn't know he'd been walking toward all along. The night was cold, but he didn't tighten his coat. The air felt good on his face, sharp, honest, alive. With each step, he replayed the moment in his mind, the boy's trembling shoulders, the fear in his voice, the way he looked up when Reagan returned with pie, that small spark of trust, that moment when the boy leaned just a little closer, when he let someone be there for him. Reagan had spent much of his own childhood wishing someone would do the same for him. He remembered long evenings waiting on porches that grew colder as the night deepened, the kind of waiting that fills a child with doubts far too big for their small hands. And remembering that pain made the moment at the station feel important, like he had been given a chance to give back something he once needed desperately. As he reached the end of the street, the wind picked up, rustling the dry leaves that had collected in the gutters. He paused for a moment, beneath a flickering lamp, staring at the quiet town he had known all his life. The bakery, the drugstore, the church steeple rising gently into the night. The familiar shapes and colors of a place that had shaped him, held him, and sometimes disappointed him. He loved this town, even with all its flaws. He loved the people in it, their warmth, their struggles, their hard days, and their hopeful ones. He loved the way they kept going, even when life felt like it was working against them. He wanted to protect that. He wanted to serve that. He didn't know how. He didn't know what it would become, but he knew deep inside, in a place untouched by doubt, that he wanted to lead not from above, but from beside. When he finally reached home, the light in the kitchen window was still on. His mother was awake, sitting at the small table, with a cup of tea between her hands. She looked up the moment the door opened. "You're late, Ronnie," she said gently. "I know," he answered, removing his coat and hanging it near the door. "I stopped at the station." She raised an eyebrow. "The station, why?" He poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. There was a boy there, alone, waiting for his father. His mother's face softened with immediate sympathy. Was he all right? Reagan nodded. Eventually, his father came, but he'd been waiting there for hours. Scared, cold. "I couldn't leave him." His mother studied him quietly. She had seen these pieces of him before, glimpses of empathy, far larger than his age. But tonight, something in his expression looked different, deeper, steadier. "What happened, Ronnie?" she asked. He took a slow sip of water, gathering his thoughts. Then he set the glass down carefully, as if the words he was about to speak required space. "I realized something," he said softly. "People need someone to be there for them, not just when things are good, especially when things aren't." His mother nodded, saying nothing, letting him find the rest of the thought on his own. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with my life," he continued, his voice hesitant. "But tonight, sitting with that boy, I felt something I've never felt before." His mother leaned forward, eyes warm, encouraging. "It felt," he said slowly, "like I was supposed to help people. Not just one, not just tonight, but, I don't know, maybe more." A long silence hung between them, not uncomfortable, not uncertain, just full. His mother reached across the table and took his hand. "Ronnie," she said gently, "leadership isn't about being in charge. It's about caring enough to step forward when others step back." He looked at her, absorbing each word as though they were meant for some future version of himself. She squeezed his hand softly. "Some people lead with their voice, but the best ones lead with their heart. And you've had that kind of heart since the day you were born." Reagan swallowed hard, emotion tightening his throat. "But what can I do?" he asked. "I'm just a no-name kid from a small town. Nobody listens to someone like me." His mother smiled a soft, knowing smile. "Great men rarely begin as great men. They begin as boys who pay attention to pain and decide not to walk past it. He sat with that for a long time, letting it settle, letting it shape something inside him. Eventually, his mother stood and kissed the top of his head, then turned toward the hallway. "Whatever path you choose, Ronnie," she said, "make sure it's one where you help others stand a little taller." He closed his eyes for a moment, hearing her words, as if they were spoken not just for the young man he was, but for the leader he would one day become. That night, he lay awake long after the house fell silent. He replayed the moment the boy grabbed his sleeve, the relief in the father's eyes, the way the lamps at the station glowed against the fog like quiet lanterns guiding lost travelers home. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was real. It was the first time he had stepped into the empty space where someone else should have been. And in that simple act, he had found the beginnings of who he was meant to be. The next morning, he woke earlier than usual. The sky was still lavender with dawn, and the air smelled of dew and coal smoke drifting from the train yard. Reagan washed his face, combed his hair, and stood in front of the mirror longer than he meant to. There was something new in his reflection, something subtle, a quiet certainty. After breakfast, he walked to the radio station, not with the slouched posture of an uncertain boy, but with the shoulders of someone beginning to understand his purpose. The station manager, a stern man with a clipped mustache, barely glanced at him as he entered. "You're late," he grumbled. "No, sir," Reagan replied with unexpected steadiness. "I'm early." The manager raised an eyebrow. "What's gotten into you?" Reagan smiled. "Just trying to do the right thing." The manager studied him for a moment, as though he was seeing him for the first time. Then he nodded. "Well then, start with these." He handed Reagan a stack of papers. "We've got a lot to do today." Reagan took them with a newfound confidence. The tasks were the same as the day before: sorting mail, carrying equipment, writing small notes for on-air hosts. But his mindset had shifted. Every small job felt like preparation. Every step forward felt like a foundation being laid. He didn't know that this quiet transformation would someday lead him to Hollywood. He didn't know it would carry him through speeches, campaigns, and the weight of a nation. He didn't know it would echo through decades, shaping his voice, his choices, his legacy. He only knew that leadership wasn't a destination. It was a decision made in the dark of night on a small-town train platform. A decision to stay when someone needed him. A decision to help without being asked. A decision to care. Years later, after the world knew his name, after the crowds filled stadiums, to hear him speak again would occasionally grow quiet when passing through small stations or driving past lonely country roads. Nancy would notice the way his eyes softened, the way he seemed to drift into memory. "What are you thinking about?" she would ask. He always gave the same gentle answer. "Just a boy I once sat beside." He never said more. He didn't need to. Some stories live best in the quiet. And for Reagan, that night remained one of the most important of his life. The night he realized that leadership wasn't about shining. It was about lighting the way for someone who had lost theirs. The night he decided the man he wanted to become, the man the world would one day follow. If this story meant something to you, I'd be honored if you stayed with us a little longer. There are more quiet memories, more gentle turning points, and more unseen sides of Reagan's life to share. If you'd like to hear them, please consider liking this video, leaving a comment, and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps keep these stories alive.